next question is, when we consider all of these relationships, what does this show us about our human nature in terms of, you've seen like one father whose son has kind of turned his back on him, and now we've seen another father and son where the son has actually killed the father in order to survive. So what does that tell us about humanity and our basic instincts? Ariana?
In life-threatening situations, if we're desperate enough, we'll jump to, like, we'll do whatever it takes to survive.
Okay, so kind of maybe desperate times, call for desperate measures. Would that be a good? Do you think that right now, where you sit, do you feel like you could ever see yourself, you don't have to raise your hand, but think about, could you ever see yourself turning your back on your family in that kind of a circumstance and like literally ripping the bread from the hand of like your parent or your sibling or something like that in order for you to survive over them? I think for most of us, we would hope that we wouldn't do that, right? But we see that in these circumstances, in these intense circumstances, this is what happens. Why do you think Ellie prays and asks that God would help him with this? I mean, we know he's kind of having this inner struggle. You know, what does that tell us about him? Do you think he still has hope that there is a God on some level?
Yes.
You, Connor, why?
Because he's still praying, he's still praying for an answer of help from God, so I think that still faith in God.
Okay. So he's on some level, somewhere deep down, he might still believe. Does anybody else agree or disagree with that? Tyler, what do you think? Do you think that he's lost all hope in God, or do you think that he still has some kind of a hope somewhere? Why do you think he still has hope?
Because he loses it first, but then when he's alone, he realizes, like at night, it's okay.
Okay, so even though he's lost it, you know, this is evident that there's still something there. Does anybody think that this is just kind of like one of those prayers you throw up, but it really doesn't show that he still has hope? Does anybody feel that way? You think he's lost all hope? Does it seem like he's lost hope in mankind?
Yes.
Why do you say he's lost hope in mankind?
Because they really
Hold on, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand so I can choose one of you. Lexi?
people like fight one another and really real, like thinking that we're like humans are crazy instead of thinking that we're actually fine.
Okay. Someone else? Giselle?
Like, they strip them from their identity and everything, and the way they treat them like dirt.
Okay. Treats them, you've seen people constantly being treated like dirt. I mean, it would be hard for me to have faith in humanity at this point, right? Do you think you would have very much faith in humanity after seeing all of these things happen over and over again every day for months? There is one question that I asked you about where we do see, though, some kind of a hope left for humanity. I asked you, what does Juliet do when they return to the barracks? What did he do? Yeah, he plays the violin. How is this an act of hope or an act of humanity in the midst of all of this catastrophe and all of this sadness? How is that an act of hope? Chris?
He's trying to lift their spirits.
Okay.
Tell them that the fact that he can play violin means that he has lost information.
Okay. He's trying to lift their spirits. Ariana, do you have something else to add?
It's something beautiful among a situation that is beyond negative and gives them a sense of positivity in that situation.
Okay. Did y'all catch that? I don't know. Did y'all feel like that was kind of I hate to use the word beautiful to describe, you know, anything related to the Holocaust, but I do think that the humanness of it is beautiful. Like the humanity of that moment is kind of beautiful. What's going on around him as he's playing the violin? What is that? What's the setting like?
It's dying.
People are dying, right? It's okay. People are dying, and they've just returned. And how far did they run exactly? Do you remember? 42 miles. So they run 42 miles in the snow. Remember, they are literally eating snow at one point to try to, you know, just get some kind of nourishment in their body, water. And so they're desperate. Like, this is a desperate situation. This is a desperate situation. And so we see, like, so much desperation. Remember when they get to the barracks, what is their reaction? Do they just walk in calmly?
No.
No, what do they do? Go ahead, Morgan.
Yeah. Oh. They start following, like, going on top of each other.
Okay. So why, I mean, we see that multiple times. Why do you think that suddenly at this point in the story, we see such, like, outrageous, kind of inhumane actions coming from the men that are left? Like, we see them trample one another to get into the barracks, and then later on, when we see them fighting for the bread, like, why do you think now that's happening versus previously when they were at Buna? Why did that not happen then as much? Why do you think they're suddenly unraveling a sheesh?
Because, like, ran so far, right? And Ellie still has hope, but seeing, like, how other people have trampled their own father, thoughts like he's getting weaker and weaker.
Okay, so Ellie's getting weaker. We can see that. Do you think that also means the other men are being pushed to literally their breaking points?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you're a cross-country runner, right?
I was.
Okay, you were. Can you imagine running 42 miles and having only eaten bread and coffee and soup for, like, months? If that was all you had to eat every day for a month, and then going out and running 42 miles in the cold?
That's coach's thought.
That's a coach's thought, not yours. Okay. So, I mean, I know for me personally, like, I don't think I would have survived that. Do y'all? Do you think that you physically could have survived? He said at one point, I thought this was kind of an interesting thing that Ellie said. He says, remember, he kind of has that moment where he's no longer wholly body and mind, right? Do y'all remember that? He says that his body and his mind are now separate entities, and it seems as though his body is just a weight that he has to carry forward in order to survive. So what does that tell us about, first of all, remember we've talked a lot about identity and how identity is a huge theme in this book. So how does that support this idea of loss of identity or loss of sense of self or loss of humanity, that he and his body are no longer one? How does that show us loss of identity? Any thoughts? Yes, Chris?
As well as mind is still him and his mind still holds what he has left of his life. His body is just whatever happened to him in the Holocaust. This was going on with his body. His body's unrestricted.
Okay. I think it's a good point. So, how many of you would feel like physically, like how you feel physically definitely impacts like your mental state? Like if you're sick, how many of you like, it's like life or death when you're sick? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And like you literally can't even. Like you can't even with anyone, right? You're like, I can't. Like I'm sick, I'm dying. When we physically feel uncomfortable, doesn't that impact us on some kind of a mental level, right? Like for runners, for example, it's always like mind over body, right? Your body tells you you can't, but you've got to keep pushing your mind. You know, mentally you have to fight that battle. So I think on some level, like we all know that like mentally our body and mind kind of need to be in like conversation with one another. Like how we feel on the outside definitely affects like our mental state. And so it seems to me that he's kind of getting this point where he's like mentally having to conquer his body. Like, and he sees like the difficulty in that because his body's in so much pain and in so much like agony. He's like got to now physically like separate himself from his pain, physically like, or mentally separate himself, I guess I should say, from his pain, from his experiences, because he's in so much pain, right? So again, we kind of see that another fracture of his identity, right? Another fracturing of his identity. Rather than being able to be one, like body and mind, now again, he's fractured and his body and his mind are separate. So his identity is again being like split apart, just like it was split apart when he loses his religion. Just like it's split apart when he loses his identity with his family and is separated from his mother and his sister